بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
So just to wrap up on some of what we've started, because these were all juristic tools, and I'll just say a little on each of them, and there's more detail in the material, just so that we don't spend too much time on this. The Quran and Sunnah, all scholars agreed on in principle. So that was not a controversial issue of do we follow Quran and Sunnah. What became more controversial was the other tools. Ijma is usually translated as consensus. But when you say consensus, how do we arrive at a consensus? Okay? Did all scholars get together and say this is their opinion? No. Did somebody go around to get the opinions of everyone? No. Consensus usually meant no known dissent. Okay. That nobody, no respected scholar was known to disagree or have an alternative opinion. Sometimes, of course, ijma meant I don't recognize your dissent and I don't recognize your opinion, so I'll still call it ijma because this is recognized opinion. So sometimes ijma meant that. And so within the schools, Malik, for example, considered ijma the amal of Medina. That was the ijma that mattered to Malik. Shafi was broader. Shafi was ijma of the ummah. For Hanafi, it was ijma of mujtahid scholars, not of everybody, not just because you're a scholar, mujtahidun. Hanbali was more on, and some of the Shafis also, ijma of Sahaba. And they differed on what authority does an ijma take? Can a generation challenge an ijma? Now there's a point that one of the scholars, Ibn Taymiyyah, makes, a number of other scholars too, that if we had a verse of the Quran to establish something, we would not need to go to ijma or qiyas. Why? We've got higher authority establishing it. If we had a sunnah or hadith establishing something, then we wouldn't need to go to ijma. We would just say the hadith says this. Therefore, ijma is understood, if you understand ijma as an independent source of legislation, source of law, independent of the Quran and the Sunnah, then if it is not in the Quran, not in the Sunnah, but it's in ijma, then how did ijma get it? They must have got it through some other form of ijtihad, either through qiyas, maslahah, something else. And so ijma is actually viewed by some scholars as a form of ijtihad. In other words, it's a product of collective ijtihad, where ijtihad through some of the tools ends up with a conclusion, everybody agrees on something. Say for example, they nearly all agree that deliberately or just laughing during prayer breaks your prayer. Okay, laughing during prayer breaks your prayer. Which verse of the Quran, which hadith? None. But you could pull certain interpretations to do with the spirit of it. But then you're looking at Maqasid of Salat. You're looking at other factors. So they would still consider ijma as a form of ijtihad. Of course, ijma has a benefit in that there is safety in numbers. But this is where we also have to be very careful. One point Shaykh Taqi Usmani makes in discussing the issue of ijtihad, because ijma was consensus of mujtahid scholars, if mujtahid scholars of another time feel there's need to change the prescription, they have the authority to do so. Point being, ijma is a human tool. Yeah, you're not putting it at the same level of Quran and Sunnah and ijma. No. The other thing is, of course, the difference, therefore, in the definition of ijma. So when one scholar says there's ijma on this, another scholar says no, there isn't. You have to actually ask, what do you mean by ijma? And he means, well, according to Amal of Medina. Okay, now I understand what you mean. Or according to Mujtahid. And sometimes ijma is ijma of our school. Ijma of the Maliki, not ijma of the Ummah. And so when you hear scholars differing on the issue of ijma, it's good to know what definition they're using. There are at least about 18 issues to do with ijma that scholars differ on. Even when you say there's ijma, how many of you say there's ijma? Do we have, is it like mutawatir? Is it like everybody agrees on ijma, or you are the only one saying ijma? So even who narrates the ijma? So you do have differences in ijma, but you also appreciate why scholars, whatever their definition, still insisted on ijma as a tool because of the safety in numbers. Having said that, they need to be really careful that you don't allow ijma to stifle ijtihad. We don't even do it with ijma. We sometimes do it with what is called jamhur, majority opinion. So somebody says something, oh, that's a minority opinion. As if because it's a minority, it is wrong by definition. Scholars agree that with the change of situation, there will be change in fatwa. And they see it at the time of the Sahaba, they see it, Prophet giving different fatwa for the same issue. You know, somebody comes to the Prophet and asks him, is it okay for me to kiss my wife while I'm fasting? Prophet says yes. Another gentleman comes, asks the same question. Is it okay to kiss my wife? Prophet says no. The gentleman leaves. Sahaba look at him like, so which one is it? And the Prophet explained. The first guy that came, the one I said yes to, he's like an elderly person, more self-control. The younger one, not too sure about him. Fatwa is fashioned for context, for its purpose. Like, who are you talking to? So, is it halal? Yes, but you will see the Prophet using Saddu Zariya saying no because it could lead to in this particular context. We all know about Shafi changing his opinions, moving from Baghdad to Egypt, and a lot of changes within schools as contexts change. Even definitions. What is Darul Harb, Darul Kufr, Darul this, Darul that? This continue to evolve, not just difference of opinion between the schools, but within the schools, different definitions. And so for some, just the fact that you can pray and you have the freedom for worship, as the Muslims had in Abyssinia, makes a place Darul Islam because it accommodates Islam. Not that Islamic rule is what is governing everything. Okay. Whereas for some, like in the Maliki, no, there must be Islamic rule, there must be an Islamic ruler, and. But you had differences even within the Maliki. Not our topic, but just to appreciate that ijma in a school did change. When they say with change of context or change of situation, there will be change in fatwa, you would naturally expect, just as from the time of the Prophet to the time of Umar, so many new fatwas came in. How many fatwas would you expect will change between that and the time of Abu Hanifa or Imam Malik or whoever? How many fatwas between the time of Imam Malik and their students and 2018? Well, what's a problem with minority opinion? Just like medicine. When a new medicine comes, even if it is superior to older medicine, we are so used to conformity that we just ask, how many scholars held this opinion? Only your teacher? Only whatever? And it's chucked away. We assess an opinion as strong or weak, unfortunately, based on how much support it has from the past or from the dead. Yeah, we use the dead scholars, and with all due respect to them, they're not around to say they agree or not agree or whether they would have changed their position on this. But since we have documented their old opinions, we use that to criticize a new opinion. Instead of going back to where did the old fiqh come from? It had an usul, yeah, let the new one be judged on its usul. But many of us we don't even know what usul is. We don't know what even qawaid or maxims or we don't even know anything about the subject. All we know is it's a minority view, never heard it before, it must be wrong. And the tendency is for us to take an opinion as right or wrong based on the extent to which it is in line with my preconceptions. Okay. So if I had a teacher who told me a voice of women is aura, they shouldn't speak in public. They shouldn't even stay in a hall like this. We should have a curtain. They should all be in niqab. They shouldn't even go and work. If I had a teacher who told me all of that, and I took that as correct, then somebody brings two opinions. Somebody says we need women in the parliament, and this scholar says it's permissible. Yusuf al-Qaradawi or pick a scholar. Another scholar says it is not permissible. So which one is right, which one is wrong? What will I do? I'll go with the opinion that is in line with what I've already accepted. Okay? Well, if she's not supposed to even be talking in the first place, she's not supposed to be even coming out, she's not supposed to even be challenging men, then how could this view be right? Or simply, all right, did Ibn Taymiyyah, did Malik, did anybody in the past second this opinion? No, then sorry. This is very dangerous, very, very dangerous, because then we Muslims undermine the survival of Islam. Islam that is supposed to be producing new medicine for people's problems, we insist on the old medicine. Why? Because it's majority opinion. Areas where ijtihad is supposed to be moving on, we stifle it. Where we need legal reforms, all sorts of reform. Every new reform, by definition, comes as a minority opinion. How can you say, if it's a minority opinion and it contradicts ijma, it is automatically wrong? You have to assess an opinion based on its own usul. You know, what is it rooted in? Is it in Quran? Is it in Sunnah? Is it... Leaves and fruits will drop with seasons, but the roots will stay where they are. And they will keep bringing fresh fruit, new leaves, new branches. Things will grow. You know what? And fields will grow. Fields. All these branches of ulum al-Quran and ulum al-Hadith and usul, these grew. We didn't have these things earlier on. But they continue to grow and bear fruit. So one critical thing is, ijma is sometimes abused and used to stifle and kill debate, and keep the ummah in the past on issues where you will know we need to go back to Quran, Sunnah, the way fiqh was produced before, which is by scholars looking at the Quran and Sunnah. That is what the Prophet said, if you hold on to, you will never lose your way. Not your old opinion you hold on to and you'll never, no, that you will stay in the past and you will drag people in the past. And especially those involved in da'wah. Yeah. Many of us have no grounding in this subject, but we have the audacity to judge scholars of the subject. You know, it's like students in university starting to get critical of their lecturers. Like, what did you graduate in? So part of what I hope, inshallah, we will look at is what exactly do scholars do in this area of ijtihad and qawaid and all of this. Why would the verse of the Quran be very clear on something and yet a scholar say something else? With the hope that we will be more careful about how we handle, how we speak about differences of opinions. If not, if you are not careful, with all your good intention about Islamic revivalism, etc., we don't have a more potent anti-Islamic element than us. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So you portray a very dynamic means of Islam, but we've always been brought up on this premise that the previous generation was better than the generation that comes. And so the scholars closest to Nabi Sallallahu and the Sahaba, they knew better. So modern day scholars...
I think it is, yeah, very, very important point. We will look at those areas that scholars consider past opinions better than present opinions. For example, how did the Prophet pray? How did he fast? Those things that they are not part of what changed with context. However, no scholar will tell you, well, the Sahaba knew better how to pray in space and what time to pray if you happen to be on the moon than you. They want in your context. So where you've got an identical context to that of the past, they would say, yes, that's definitely more assured. But in an area of mu'amalat, so Imam Shatibi said, in issues to do with ibadah and aqidah, the basic premise is ittiba, just follow what the past did, ibadah. Why? Because we don't ask any questions regarding what's the reason behind it. They prefer, well, we don't know why we pray 5 times a day, or not 6, or not 2 rakahs for Maghrib instead of 3. And there are those things that they either put under ta'abbud, and we'll come back to this when we come to Maqasid, where they feel, no, on these areas, just follow what you have been taught and don't add anything new. Adding creativity there is called bid'ah. As a general rule, there are exceptions. We'll come to that. But in areas to do with mu'amalat, as opposed to ibadah between you and your creator, mu'amalat, interpersonal, social transactions, dunya issues, the basic fundamental is the maqasid, the objective. And so you would find scholars, they have the position of their madhab on any issue to do with mu'amalat, like Islamic finance. But where they find, in a particular context, that method of usul will not achieve the maqasid of Sharia, they actually put their, or it's going to create unnecessary difficulty, they actually put their position of their madhab aside and go with the position of another madhab that achieves the maqasid. And so all over the world, nearly every scholar has moved on to Hanafi on issues to do with Islamic finance. On issues to do with Islamic financial insurance, takaful, they have moved Maliki. On issues to do with Hajj and crowd management, they have moved Hanbali. We've moved to Hanbali. Shafi, you will do wudu. How would you do tawaf? If the moment you touch a woman, your ablution is spoiled. On that, they don't stick to their guns. They say, no, on this issue, yeah, you will never finish tawaf. Yeah, I mean, okay. So on that type of issue, yeah, they will go with another school. On asthma patients, etc., we go Shafi. On women's rights, if you're going to do legal reforms to have more egalitarian rights for women in marriage to have divorce, they go Maliki. Just as you say, yes, I can get into a marriage, you can say, I'm going out. The conditions and rights of the husband and the wife, and you want to fit it to your own situation. Why? Because, oh, she's working on a better job, and whatever your unique situation, and you want reforms, you go Hanbali. They call that talfiq. Talfiq is where you take something from another madhab into your own when it achieves a maqasid, and this is where we'll come to this triangulation later on, and how maqasid help the scholar in deciding what's the best thing to do in our new context. Is there another madhab that already has the answer? No need to get creative. If, however, we don't have an answer, then we will have to go back to original sources and do ijtihad. Why? Because the past did not address this issue in this context. Yes, they addressed this issue, but not in this context. Yeah.
So let's take an example like traveling for women. I mean, the regulation is that a woman should not travel for 3 days without a mahram. But that's contextual, or is it?
Even at the time of the Prophet, and we can come back to specific questions later, because what I'd like is, let's establish the rulings and the equations that scholars follow. Then when it comes to a particular thing, we will see how after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the wives of the Prophet went with Uthman bin Affan and Abdurrahman bin Auf as their mahram. They're not mahrams in the biological sense. Okay, they can't expose their aura to them. And why scholars in the Hanafi, Shafi and Maliki schools regarded that if a woman travels with a group of other women who are not related to her, or with a group of men and women, that serves as mahram. The Hanbali school was the only school that insisted, no, you must have your brother or your father or your husband with you. But they've changed the law just last year. Yeah, that the Hajj agency fulfills the role of safety. So why on that issue did scholars from Ibn Hazm, Ibn Hajar, Ibn Taymiyyah, etc., which hadith did they use to know why did the Prophet say that? Because when we know the why, the reason, what's the objective, then you can see where the scholars now start to differ and why scholars would have no problem with a woman traveling alone if it was safe. They don't encourage even men to travel alone. You know, you try and do everything in Jama'ah. But where there's diversity, we will see inshallah how they handle that.
You don't have to answer the question, but I just want to raise a good example. You know, when you talk about preconceived notions and to understand that even past scholars, no matter how great they were, had their own lenses in which they view the world. So for example, in South Africa and Durban, any ulama you speak to will tell you that it is not permissible for women to go to the mosque. And that there's rulings and whatever, and they shouldn't attend Eid Salah, and yes, it happened in the time of the Prophet, even though there's a clear hadith about the Prophet. So in this instance, the hadith is trumped by the opinion of local scholars who will now reference some other scholar, or maybe, I don't know if they use ijma or whatever. So we can see how very easily this whole system, which is not foolproof, and that people who are apparently scholars can still abuse the system and not follow the rules and have consequences for populations. And just the other point about minority opinion. And it's interesting again, so about like preconceptions. If we look at Ibn Arabi, okay, well-respected scholar, but if I anonymously had to quote him on a woman's aura or on female imamat, people will think I'm some Western feminist. But he had very different opinions. So it's really, I think for many of us, we have to try and look deeper than just the actual methodology and have to understand the people's philosophy, people's opinions, preconceptions, and that a lot of that has to play a role, a much bigger role, as big a role as sometimes methodologies. We can discuss it at some other time, but those are just two important points.
Okay. The concern, just like in maths with methodology, is let's agree on methodology, because if we don't agree on any methodology, then it's completely on the taste side. Okay, that's one thing. Secondly, scholars had fields of specialization. So on issues to do with hadith, a scholar would be authority or an authority on that subject. On a subject to do with tasawwuf, for example, and purification of the heart, you would find this scholar is an authority there, but not an authority on fiqh, or not an authority on tafsir, or not an authority on hadith, or not an authority on something else. Which is why, just like in medicine, it is useful to know the difference between a pediatrician, a dentist, and a gynecologist. And not just you're a doctor. You know, you're a sheikh, you're a great scholar of Islam. Yes, but what specialization? Then we know when your opinion, we're not saying experts don't make mistakes, but at least if those of us who are not experts are to follow somebody on an issue, it makes more sense for us to follow what do the majority of experts in this field say. Majority is not necessarily right, but there's less of an error if the majority agree on a particular method than one other, which is why madhabs are so important. Where you have a school, not a one-man show, you have hundreds of scholars who have agreed on this methodology of analysis. Actually, you had literally hundreds of schools of thought in Islamic jurisprudence. But gradually, as these students got to study what this other teacher and that whatever, kind of like, I am more in line with this, though I still accept this particular way of analyzing on this issue. And so you'll find within a school more than one opinion. Yeah. On a particular issue, in the same school, Ibn Taymiyyah would say triple divorce on one occasion, it is equal to one. Hanbali. If you ask any of the Hanbali ustaz now, a man divorced his wife 3 times on one occasion. Okay? Some scholars, Ibn Taymiyyah's father, a few within the Maliki, Andalus, whatever, because even in the Maliki, you had about 5 sub-schools within the Maliki. They are the Malikis of the Andalus, Morocco, Spain area, there were the Malikis of Egypt, there were the Malikis of Iraq, there were the Malikis of Medina, there were the Malikis of Sham. And on some issues they differed, because they also existed in different contexts. And they met with other schools and they refined their tools. So Shafi, for example, just like with other schools, Shafi did not recognize maslaha or istihsan. or urf. But Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Imam al-Juwayni, Fakhruddin al-Razi, Shafi scholars, they brought maslaha back in, or let me just say, brought it in with conditions. And so a school continues to evolve in its methodology. Today you find a lot of them actually coming very close to each other on many issues. And this is because some of these tools, say on biomedical issues, many issues you can't get clean qiyas. These tools are not very useful on many completely new cases. You can't get ijma on organ, something as simple as organ transplant, for example. So you can't get ijma, you can't get ra'i of Sahaba on it. Qiyas is a bit difficult because qiyas has to go with illa. Okay. When you say, can you really say blood from somebody, yes, blood is najas, but is it najas if it goes into my blood? Is my blood najas when it is inside me? Okay. Or is it najas when it comes out and I can't consume it anymore? So is it just blood in me is what is haram, or blood consuming, eating? So because they don't feel comfortable saying eating blood is the same as transfusing blood, can I have the organ of a pig? Are we going to say you can't consume pig? Because if I can have the organ of a human being, does it mean you can consume a human being? So because they are not comfortable with the qiyas on that, they don't go with qiyas. Amal of Medina has nothing to do with on this subject area. Urf, it was not an urf, it's a completely new subject area. And what you're left with are things like istihsan, maslaha, istishab. Istishab is saying everything is halal except what is haram. Unless there is harm that we can get from maslaha, or benefit is greater than the harm. So what you find in many contemporary issues is the madhabs are all the difference they had on ijma and how they use qiyas and how they use ra'i of Sahaba and which Sahaba a particular madhab preferred. Say Hanafi did not have a lot of respect for Abu Hanifa on his own on an issue to do with fiqh, unless there was corroborating evidence. Why? He embraced Islam only 3 years before the Prophet passed away. And for him to say something that everybody is expected to know, but nobody else said anything except him, Hanafis feel that's not strong enough. So what you find is methodology still matters, but because if you're going to do istishab, or particularly istihsan and maslaha and sadr zariya, you're dealing a lot with the values, what we call the Maqasid. And so Maqasid has become more important than it used to be. And as things change even more rapidly, where there are less things in common for you to use qiyas and the others for, you're going to have to really polish your skills on qawaid and maqasid that deal with the spirit and the values, so long as, of course, they don't contradict clear text, but usually these are areas where the text is very silent about. So on the issue of differing scholars, yes, we respect differing scholars, but it's also important to know who's a specialist. And inshallah, one of the last things we'll be discussing later today would be what scholars propose you do when scholars differ on an issue. Yeah. Because there's also no, unfortunately, they don't agree on what to do when they don't agree. So we'll inshallah look at that. Yes, sister.
Use of secondary sources for Islamic law, and drawing on your point on the expertise of the scholar, does the authority of the interpretation then lie exclusively with the fuqaha, especially when it comes to Maqasid and qawaid and contemporary issues? And for me personally, it would be very like bioethical issues from medical background. So when the scholars are silent about something, who then gets to join? So in terms of convergence, in terms of integration of information and knowledge, how do you go forward? notion that the interpretation lies exclusively with Islamic scholars that arise out of Islamic universities. So what about academics like ourselves who are coming out of Western universities with PhDs in Islamic law and those things? Where does that fit?
The word ayah, which means a lesson, is used by Allah to describe what He has in the Quran for us. It is also used to describe things in ourselves. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ آيَاتٍ. سَنُرِيهُمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ. Allah talks about His ayat in creation and in revelation. In other words, it's in society, so you will need people who study medicine. The people who would say this verse of the Quran seems to have a bearing on something to do with science, it's not the ulama who didn't study science. Quran is a book for life, and you have to have experts of what they call waqi, the context or the situation or the subject matter, and the ulama of the nas. And so for today, it is very difficult to get one scholar who is well grounded in everything. So what you now have, which is new, is councils of ulama, or fatwa councils, that also have the academics and the experts in sociology when it comes to a sociological issue. The doctors, they are always there in the fatwa councils of medicine, and if you look at it, FEMA and some of the major councils, they will make sure the ulama who know the text sit side by side and understand the issues, and they debate and they debate and they debate. But because it is finally a product of ijtihad, you will still find on some issues those scholars still differing. But because it's a product of ijtihad, the scholar is not saying you are going to hell or this is, it's not as if you're saying alcohol is halal. It's not that type of clear disagreement on text. It's we disagreeing with each other on what's the best way of representing the Prophet in this particular context. So what is important for us is to understand that these are products of ijtihad, and we should be more respectful of the difference. And we will come to this later, that the evidence belongs to the category they call dhanni. Dhanni means there's an element of speculation, either because it is dhanni thubut. So all Quran and Sunnah, actually Quran and Sunnah mutawatir, belong to what they call qat'i thubut. Mutawatir means multiple independent chains that nobody argues about the historicity and authenticity of that information. It is supported, it is corroborated by other chains that it is as authentic. They don't like to say that, but historically it is as authentic. We are as certain that this came from the tongue of the Prophet ﷺ as we are that the Quran came from his tongue. So many independent chains, there's no way this could humanly have been manufactured, fabricated. It's secure from that. They call that hadith, or those hadith that are mutawatir. Where it is ahad, single chained, or two chains, or three chains, or what is not enough to constitute mutawatir, they describe those as ahad or khabar wahid. Those hadith belong to dhanni category, and we'll come to that. This is where we're moving on to the next chapter when we come to the search for certainty. So we'll just come back to that. But on what we're doing, what the scholars have tried to do is, even in the tools of ijtihad, to maximize certainty. So they try not to just use one tool. If they use qiyas, but they find qiyas conflicting with another tool, they will decide to change tools. So if they feel maslaha or amal or urf in this particular context will give us a better result than qiyas, then that shifting from qiyas to urf is called istihsan. That's one of the meanings of istihsan. Moving from one type of evidence to another that is more equitable, that is more in line with the Maqasid. So on every issue, and we will now look at the equations, but what scholars try to do is they try to back things with extra evidence. So if your conclusion has been arrived at by qiyas, we also want to make sure it's not contrary to maslahah or public interest. Okay, so analogy is good, but it shouldn't conflict with public interest. It shouldn't conflict with equity. So urf is fine, but it shouldn't conflict with something else. The moment there's conflict, they start being very careful, and that usually leads to istihsan, which all of them accept, just under different names. This issue of different names complicates the study, but simplifies it in another way. Or you begin to see why they have consensus on issues you would normally say they shouldn't have consensus over. Take istihsan. Istihsan, which is the concern for equity, concern for fairness, what is most appropriate for the context, considering Maqasid. Hanafi say they don't recognize maslahah. Hanafi do not recognize sadhu-zariya. But when a Hanafi starts explaining what he means by istihsan, but that's what we call maslahah in Maliki. And the Hanbali would be beside me saying, yeah, that's what we call maslahah too. And you say, let me tell you what sadhu-zariya is. And I start explaining. The Hanafi said, oh, we call that istihsan. We don't need a separate tool called maslahah or whatever. Why? Istihsan is like an adjustable spanner. It can do many things in the Maliki. Hanafi. Whereas the Malikis have different sizes of spanners. So they need 3 spanners for this, where these ones have put the thing together as one. So even though this one says we don't recognize this one, it's not that they don't use it, it's just that they use it but they call it by a different name. Somebody says, I don't recognize urf, people's custom. But I recognize istishab, the presumption of continuity, that what was going on will continue going on. But that's urf for us. Well, don't need urf if you have already got an istihsan. Istishab. Another person says, and I don't recognize shar'u man qablana, but I recognize urf. But that's what we're talking about. And so, when you find differences of opinion, or differences regarding what tool is accepted or not accepted, for whatever reason, sometimes it's really just terminology. Sometimes. To wrap up on this, what you find is Hanafi school, you all know BODMAS? What does it stand for? Bracket open. Of division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. In other words, if you look at the last one, yes, you open your bracket, but you will divide, then you multiply, then add, then you subtract. Not the other way around. Don't mix it up. Okay? Now when somebody says, what is 7 minus 2 multiplied by 8 divided by 4? If you don't know anything about arithmetic, you do what I do. You kind of like repeat, what did you say? 7? Yes. Minus? Yeah. That's what you do. And your answer is this. But in mathematics, there's no madhab that does things like that. There's no school of mathematical scholars that do that. What's the first thing they tell you to do? They call it simplifying the equation, right? Yeah. Where you rearrange it to respect this hierarchy. That you will divide first, or you do things in brackets first. You don't start multiplying things in brackets with things outside brackets. No. Remove the brackets, and then we will rearrange things, and then we will start bringing the calculators out and that. So there is a methodology that the experts agree they follow when it comes to the hierarchy, which is superior to what? Is minusing superior, which one comes first? So in the madhabs, what you have is, in the Hanafi school, they all agree that Quran is greater than Sunnah. Okay? Not just that, there's some type of Sunnah that's greater than another type of Sunnah, which they will come to. So they specify Sunnah Mutawatir. Just before we go too far. For Hadith scholars, their concern with Hadith in the classification is just how strong or how weak it is. Generally, you've got four major criteria. Some break it up more, but four major criteria for deciding whether Hadith is authentic or not. One, they look at the persons, their integrity, their character. What do we know about the individuals who are narrating this hadith? Everybody in the chain, one by one. What do we know about each one of them? Character, competence. Not just character. Is he a businessman relating a hadith that has nothing to do with business? That matters. So they look at the competence of the person in that area. Is Aisha narrating something that women would know more and it contradicts something Umar is saying? So it's not just the character, we trust both of them, but the competence also. Okay. So you're a judge. How many witnesses do you accept? Okay. On areas where women were more competent than men, a woman's witness was considered stronger than a man's witness. So for example, like in most schools, they wouldn't accept a man's testimony on issues to do with childbirth. You said there was a mixture during, after pregnancy or during pregnancy, etc., etc. They will ask, what was a man even doing there? Yeah, like they didn't think of male gynecologists and all that. Yeah, what's even a guy doing there? A man comes to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I got married to my wife, but this black woman says she suckled me and my wife. But because that is haram, the Prophet ﷺ, what else other than divorce is left for you? We didn't need more corroborating evidence when who was going to argue with her? In areas where a woman's testimony was considered the same as a man's testimony, like in the authenticity of hadith, nobody said, oh, it's only Aisha that said so. No, they would take it. Where men were more competent than women, in areas of violent crimes, for example, the ulama tend to say, there we will, because it's qisas, this we will take men, not women. Or in some business transactions, some, not all business transactions, they would take men, not women. Why? Because this is an area of men. Yeah, we will take women, but we will take two men. But if a woman was going to come, we would need double. It's more like saying we need two experts or one expert and two less, so non-experts. At the end of the day, the judge decides what gives him confidence on a particular. You don't impose witnesses on the judge. You don't come and say, 4 of us saw zina, and he says, but I don't trust you. Well, Quran said 4, we're 4. Judge, I don't trust you, and up to the judge what convinces him. So, you're looking at the competence, you're looking at the character. You're also looking at the chain, the linkages. You know, did this person actually meet that person? You know, when did you embrace Islam? Did you embrace Islam before he died? Everything in the books on Ilm al-Rijal or studying of the biographies of the narrators of hadith, they want to be sure this person met that person if he said, I got a hadith from somebody. If, however, we have no record that you in Iraq ever came to Medina, and we have no record that this Imam Malik ever went to Iraq, but you're saying you got it from him, we're not saying it's a lie. You probably got it from somebody who got it from him. But since we don't know that somebody, we can't strengthen that hadith. We'll just say we've got a broken chain.
Shaykh, in that example, you don't reject that hadith.
Which hadith?
The one you just said where there's a broken chain. It's a weak hadith, but it's not rejected.
No, it's not necessarily even weak. This is where did the chain break? Did it break later or did it break earlier on? So you will find, for example, scholars like Ibrahim al-Nakhai, and this is an area where the Hanafis and the Malikis accept broken chains. Hanafis accept broken chains better than ijtihad. Shafis are more critical, and later Hanbalis became more critical of broken chains. But what does a broken chain mean? When you say a tabi, say Sufyan al-Thawri or Ibrahim al-Nakhai, take Ibrahim al-Nakhai. Ibrahim al-Nakhai said the Prophet ﷺ said something. And you know, but he didn't meet the Prophet. Do you trust him? Just because he missed the name. Ibrahim al-Nakhai reported that where a hadith was so well known, it had many chains, they would just say the Prophet said. Where only one person said so, we will mention his name. In other words, for Ibrahim al-Nakhai, a hadith that was mursal with a broken chain was actually more authoritative than one that had a full chain. The problem is that makes it difficult to go and verify. So the arguments of the Shafi and the Hanbali is like, look, we can't say the Prophet said, we don't know who he got it from. He didn't. It just puts that question mark on it. So, because if you say it is weak or you're not recognizing it, then are you questioning the integrity of the person who said it? You accept him on other hadith, yeah. Here he said so, are you saying it's not true? So this is a fundamental difference between the Hanafi and the Maliki on one side, who Muwatta Malik is full of mursal hadith. It is later Malikis that came and drew, completed the chains. I think there are about a few hadith that their chains couldn't be completed. But this is an area where they differ on that.
So just a comment that came up last Jummah khutbah around the hadiths, that if there is a broken chain, you shouldn't reject the hadith, which is becoming a bit of a norm.
Yeah.
You categorize it in that category, but you don't reject it, because it could be true.
Very true. And this is why they would like to maximize certainty by looking at, is there any other support? So if you have a hadith, like, okay, you can't be the first to have heard that hadith. Did any Sahaba put it into practice? So can we get a support for this hadith by looking at Ra'i of Sahaba? Okay, can we get it from Amal of Medina? Can we get something else that, gives it more strength? So the other thing they look at is corroboration. Is this supported by something else? Okay, is this hadith supported by other forms of evidence? Are there other hadith that say the same thing? So for example, the hadith you brought, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is reported by, the hadith by Asma, that for a woman everything should be covered except this and this, the face and hands. That hadith of Asma has a broken chain in it. But there are two other hadith, one by Aisha, another by Qatada, that are complete. So it's because even though it's broken, do you chuck it away? Others say, no, you can't chuck it away. Why? You've got other hadith that strengthen it. Then Maliki will look into Amal of Medina. How were the women of Medina dressing? Could you see their faces? Etc. And with all of that, they will use that for their own fatwa. Whereas for the Hanbali, since Abdullah bin Mas'ud, a respected Sahaba, considered the face as being awra, you find most in the Hanbali school saying niqab should be worn. But that is ra'i of Sahaba, but not backed by amal, not backed by other sources of evidence. And this takes us to, we'll come back to these equations in a minute, but that takes us back to the equations they use. So another is this issue of corroboration. Is this supported by other hadith? And the content. Like, forget about who said what about it. What exactly is the hadith saying? Okay, is it contradicting something that doesn't make too much sense? The Prophet ﷺ said, لا تبدأوا سلام لأهل الكتاب. Do not initiate saying salam to Ahl al-Kitab. In another hadith, when salams to you, you respond with wa alaik, not wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so I don't initiate salams, yeah. But the Prophet also said, say salams to those you know and those you don't know. You know, salams, that's our greeting. Why can't I say salams to a non-Muslim? So where you have what they call ta'arud, conflict, some would want to say, let's start looking at context. Okay, let's start looking at context. You say, the hadith of do not initiate salams to non-Muslims was said by the Prophet ﷺ after Handak, the Battle of Handak, and they were going to go and punish Banu Qurayza. Where he said, do not pray Asr until you reach Banu Qurayza. And if they're walking, push them to the side and do not initiate salams to them. If you know what Banu Qurayza did, you know the context. And why other Sahaba like Ibn Mas'ud would say, even if Fir'aun greeted me, I will answer him with wa alaikum salam. You know, some Sahaba, actually the Sahaba, understood the context of the hadith. And because they didn't see a contradiction, yes, you know, in this context, you answer wa alaik. Why? Because the context in which the Prophet ﷺ said so was when some of the Jews were saying, Assam alaik, you know, some means poison or like death be upon you. Then the Prophet solved the problem by just saying wa alaik. Is it haram to say wa alaikum salam even if somebody says Assam alaik? If the Quran says you can forgive, if the Quran says you should even do itfability here ahsan, is that creating a ruling that it is haram? Or is it tied to a context where if you went and said Assam alaik to Umar bin Khattab, what would he have done? You know, like if you was the Prophet giving a prescription that will just stop this kind of practical joke, especially when there's already tension? And so scholars would look at the content before they say, no, this one contradicts the other one, so this one must be weak. No, really, you know, this is probably the most difficult criteria to look at, the mutton. Yeah.
In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he acted as sometimes as a qadi, sometimes as a mufti, and sometimes as a ruler. Is there a differentiation in Sharia with the context in that, or is it does it apply sometimes to personal circumstances to the community, or is it as a ruler of a community he makes this decision?
Inshallah, yes, you are right. These decisions all were there, and that is handled, inshallah, in lesson 29. But this is a very important question. When the Prophet said something, was he saying it in his capacity? Just like what we said, can you kiss your wife during Ramadan? You know, what is the context? Was that a ruling for mankind, or was that a ruling where it was in his capacity as a mufti responding to specific context? So yes, you do have that variety, and that affects the way some scholars interpret a hadith. And we will look at more examples, inshallah. Thank you.
See the number for the one of context. Especially in South Africa, it brings into question a lot of things, you know, the question of greeting. You have to greet people who are not Muslim and all that. Here you've got the merchant class, you know, which has a market of people. A lot of them are not Muslim. Do you greet them with salam alaikum? Because a lot of them, you know, are getting dawah. They are hearing about people. Do you respond to them by saying wa alaikum salam or whatever? For instance, I come from a family, I'm the only Muslim. And these people expect me to greet when I come. So what do? Do I greet or do not greet because these people are Christians? You know, it's one of the most difficult things.
Yeah.
That it brings you to focus a lot of things.
Good. I mean, a lot of what I will be focusing on is not answering and giving one answer when scholars differ. I find it easier to just let you know why scholars differ on this and why some scholars say something else. And you can look at your own context, which one achieves, if you triangulate with Maqasid, which one is more in line, what they call the munasab, the more appropriate for your context, looking at what Islam tries to build. I mean, why do we allow interfaith relations? It's building relations. Why do you eat food of Ahl al-Kitab? Building relations. It would have been very simple to just say no to some of these things. So if Islam is interested in building relations, if the Prophet ﷺ, even though he could have taken a loan from a Muslim, went and took a loan from a Jew, why? When he died, his shield was with a Jew as a collateral for some purchases that he made. Why would he go there? Why not just borrow from Umar or Uthman or one of the more well-to-do? Why was he interested in bridge building? And if that is something that is important, especially where you're a minority, it's important irrespective. But because the Prophet was not a minority when he was bridge building at the time, it's not from a position of weakness, no, it was from a position of strength. Then what would be more appropriate for your own context? This is something you would probably be better at answering, inshallah. So what you have is, on that issue of corroboration, hadith scholars, it was enough to say this hadith was authentic or less authentic or not authentic, etc. They weren't concerned with, is the hadith mutawatir or not mutawatir? Okay. So if you said, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said something, then you had generation of Sahaba, or what you call first generation. Then you had second generation, students of the Sahaba. Third generation. So you have one generation, second and third. When a hadith was narrated by one person, I should actually leave it like that. And in the first three generations, this is somebody at any point in this, the chain of this hadith, whether from the time of Sahaba, only one Sahaba narrated it, or maybe we had more than one Sahaba narrating the hadith, but finally we are here, so this is maybe Bukhari or Muslim. Actually, if you look at most of the hadith of Bukhari, they have a minimum of about 5 chains, and sometimes they are 2 Sahaba or 2 Tabi or whatever. But in every generation, if there's only one person we are depending on for this information, that hadith is called Garib. If we have up to 2 people we are depending upon, they call it Aziz. If we have up to 3, Mashhur. Some would say 4 also Mashhur, 5 Mashhur. But the difference between Mashhur and Mutawatir is more relative. Hanafis usually will take that if it's up to 4, it becomes Mutawatir. So more than 3 Mutawatir. Imam As-Suyuti would say Mutawatir starts with 10 and above. And so they differ. Sometimes it depends on the topic. If there's a topic which has been very controversial and we expect everybody to have heard the hadith and we only hear a few, they get more suspicious. It's like telling you somebody was on a minaret and went to call adhan, but then he slipped and he fell down. And we have only one person telling us that. Like we were all in the mosque, we all heard the adhan end halfway. How would you say there would be no news on how that, the mu'adhin, like nobody seems to know about it? There was a change of mu'adhin, no news, no janazah, no... how can there be only one narration? So depending on the topic, the scholars would feel there are some topics that were so public. When the Prophet ﷺ said, do not pray Asr until you reach Banu Qurayza, there are over 100 chains of that hadith. Why? It was said to Medina, it was said in Paul, everybody heard what he said. Yeah. So, or where he would say things like, whoever lies against me, man kadhiba alayya muta'ammidan, whoever deliberately lies against me, let him know he has prepared for himself a seat in hell. Okay. He said it again and again and again and again. There are over 100 chains of that hadith. So, mutawatir is where, and this could be So you can have all sorts of fanning out. Of course, it makes sense that first generation, you will have fewer numbers. As you move away, they will teach their students and their students will teach, so it will grow exponentially. So if you have a hadith that starts with 3 Sahaba but ends with 1, this is still called Garib. Why? It's still one person we are depending on. It doesn't matter how many, it's just one reliable, so it's still one chain or equivalent to ahad. Or we have 2 here, 1 here. Or we have 2 here, 2 here, and then 3. So long as at any level we have less than 3, it belongs to ahad. Or it is 3 and below, it is ahad. When it is greater, this is, I've already said there are differences on what makes mutawatir, but just for the sake of moving on, where they have considered it has 4 or above. In other words, this hadith is saying the same thing as this, saying the same thing as this. So you have all of these independent chains, and every level we have 4 and above. That hadith is called mutawatir. Hadith that was mutawatir belongs to what they call qat'i thubut. They are certain about its authenticity. Simply mutawatir means it's beyond, like we are certain about its authenticity. Yeah. There's no humans that could have fabricated this. The chains were too independent, the individuals all well known, there's no way this could have been fabricated. So when we say mutawatir, this is what we mean. A hadith with so many chains, so many individuals in each chain of the narration. So where you have Quran, Sunnah, mutawatir, then you have qiyas. Then I think they usually put ijma. You forgive my remembering. I think it's no.
Yes.
Hanafi? Ijma first. Ijma. Istihsan in Hanafi. Sorry.
I think one of the misconceptions that many people don't understand is that when a hadith is mutawatir, it doesn't necessitate fard or wajib.
Yes.
Like for example, usage of miswak. There is no mazhab that says it's fard or
Yes.
wajib. So mutawatir hadith doesn't necessitate that this is fard or wajib.
Yes.
So fiqh is different, and the authenticity of the hadith or the category of the hadith is a separate issue.
True. You can have mutawatir telling you something is haram. You can have mutawatir telling you it is makruh. You can have mutawatir telling you it's just permissible, mubah. You can have mutawatir telling you it's mustahab, and you can have mutawatir telling you it is fard. So just because it is mutawatir doesn't automatically mean it's one of these. It's just that whatever you conclude it is more authentic. Nobody is challenging it. So as he said, mutawatir does not mean fard or haram. You will have to look at what they call the dilala, the meaning, the implication. What do we get from it? We'll have to look at that before we decide what is it saying. Thank you very much, brother. If you look at lesson 20, page 97. Page 97, this whole colored area. So that's what we are looking at. And for the Hanafi, Istihsan is the next highest authority after Sunnah Mutawatir. Followed by what? Qiyas. Followed by Sunnah Ahad. And then it carries on. When you look at the Maliki also regard that the highest authority is Quran, followed by Sunnah Mutawatir, followed by Amal. Because they consider Amal as being nearly Mutawatir also, though not written. But so, what's the difference between Hadith and Sunnah? Do we go with Quran and Sunnah, or do we go with Quran and Hadith? Quran, Sunnah. So what is the difference between Sunnah and Hadith?
Practice that wasn't narrated as
Hadith is okay. I think Hadith is more broader.
Good.
Sunnah is more broader.
Okay, good. So a little like what the sister is saying. What was the practice or tradition of the Prophet ﷺ? Okay, is Sunnah. The narration from which we get Sunnah is Hadith. But for Malikis, Amal of Ahl al-Madinah is a more reliable source of Sunnah. By Sunnah you mean the norm of what was Sunnah, what was not nadir or exceptions to the rule. So here, again, just to remember, everybody is trying to put in a system that is as close to the Sunnah as possible. They want to represent the Prophet in his absence. So the best representation, of course, is Quran. Then Sunnah Mutawatir. For Hanafis, Istihsan is going with the values of justice and equity that come directly from the Quran and Sunnah Mutawatir. So it is more authoritative than Qiyas. Are we together on that one? Yeah. And Qiyas is more reliable than Ijma. Why? Because this is Qiyas with the Quran and Sunnah. Whereas Ijma is ijtihad of ulama and their consensus in their context. And Sunnah Ahad, Hanafi put it so far behind. Why? Because it can't be stronger than all of these. It's just a single chain. You could have human error there. In other words, for Hanafis, this is the equation for determining what should be the ruling on an issue. In the definition, it is Hanafi. This is why when we say ijma, what does ijma mean? We would have to say according to which school. According to Maliki, ijma is amal. According to the early Hanbalis, ijma was ijma of Sahaba, not ijma of anybody else. But when some of the later scholars use the word ijma, Ibn Taymiyyah, they accommodated others. This is where you find differences within a school. That's what makes your question difficult to answer. Ijma is here, after Qiyas. No, they don't have ijma of the companions as an independent source. Yeah.
So
the reason is because anybody who says ijma of Sahaba, anybody who says ijma of Sahaba, kind of like, all right. Like what? Did somebody go around Sahaba? Did they all come and say we agreed? And so if you say no, nobody went around to get opinions of all Sahaba. Sahaba didn't all come together to say this is areas of ijma. Then to them, anybody saying ijma has no evidence that there was ijma of Sahaba on a particular issue. So when they use the term ijma, they were not talking of ijma of Sahaba. And actually, everybody differs on their definition of ijma. This is...
asking that, there's a famous hadith, I don't know hadith properly, but it says that Rasulullah said, follow the Quran, the Sunnah, and my Sahaba, and the Sunnah of my Sahaba. And those who are not on that are on bid'ah. So I'm asking in that context.
So that is the argument used for ijma. It is also used for ra'i of Sahaba. But when you say follow my sunnah or my practice and the practice of my Sahaba, scholars will use, that is why we are using qiyas, because Sahaba use qiyas. That is why we are doing maslaha, because Sahaba use maslaha. In other words, these tools, they are going back to the Quran, Sunnah and Sahaba and establishing those tools from there. So they don't view these as bid'ah, as some innovation that came later, but view them as actually rooted in how things were done at the time of the Prophet and during the time of Sahaba. Yes, sir.
Will a tacit approval, just the silence of Sahaba on an issue, be considered as ijma of Sahaba?
Would silence of Sahaba be considered ijma? For some, yes. For others, that's not enough. Because somebody was silent does not tell you why the person was silent. Okay, so Umar bin Khattab says if you divorce 3 times, it is equal to 3. One of the Sahaba grumbled about it, Umar ibn Abbas. However, since everybody knew why Umar did it, he was doing what they call saddu zariya. People were abusing permission for triple divorce, etc. And to him, this will stop it in that context. So, no problem. No major opposition. Everybody understood the context and why. No major opposition when Umar suspended the cutting of the hands due to difficulty. No major opposition when the Prophet said do not collect zakat on horses, but Umar started collecting zakat on horses. Why? Because most Sahaba could see why. At the time of the Prophet we needed more horses, so it was what today you would call tax exemption. But when we had so many horses, people who were keeping horses were making far more money than people keeping camels, but yet we tax people on camels. Umar felt, and the point the brother was making, when the Prophet said, do not collect zakat on horses, was that in his capacity as a prophet? So this is a ruling till the day of judgment? Or was that in his capacity of a head of state deciding on what was in the best interest of the community at that time? And the next head of state feels, no, this policy has done its job, now we need another policy to increase the pool of zakat and benefit the people even more. And so in that sense, Umar didn't view the Prophet ﷺ as speaking in his capacity as a prophet, but as a head of state making an economic policy. So, silence of others doesn't say we agree. It may be not worth arguing. It may be I disagree, but what's the use? I don't want to. Sometimes it may be I'm scared. Sometimes it may be it's not worth it. And so many scholars did not take ijma sukuti or silence as an active. It's more passive. Some did. Especially if the kind of issue was one where if it was wrong, Sahaba would have disagreed on. And so if they didn't, then you calling it wrong, maybe you don't understand the context. Yeah, and so to look at why would they be quiet on something like that. So it's actually among the many issues on qiyas on which scholars, on ijma, on which scholars have differed. So back here, amal, higher authority. After amal, then what? Maslaha. Okay. Remember, maslaha in Maliki is just a subset of Istihsan. But Hanafis bring Istihsan earlier. This is actually what has made them our lifesavers in Islamic finance. Yeah. And some of these that are tied to text, which others got tied down to, Hanafis got more flexibility on those issues. Maslaha. Remember, ijma, this is, if you ask Malikis what is ijma, ijma and amal are basically the same. After maslaha, then what?
Yes.
Qiyas. And then other tools. Shafi, like everybody else, Quran greater than Sunnah, mutawatir. Then ijma. Then ijma. Then Sunnah ahad.
Yes.
Yes.
Shafi
Sounding like mutawatir since all of you are saying it. Shafi, ijma, and then qiyas. Okay, according to later Shafis. Okay, yeah, early. Okay. All right. So Imam Shafi. Okay, this madhab has evolved. If you put the madhab the way Shafi left it, you will not be fair to Shafis today. Are we together on that? Yeah. So, for the sake of representing the earlier, forgive me for not going with this for now. After ijma was sunnah ahad, then qiyas. Okay? They didn't earlier on, no maslaha. Earlier on, they'll take istihsan and other things, but this was the early equation. And because it was tied to that, qiyas is really where ijtihad picked up. We'll look at other things later.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So in the sunnah ahad, you are using hadith means sunnah.
Yes.
That's when you say that.
Yes, sorry. So this should be a hadith ahad.
Yes.
That would be more accurate. Thank you. Hanbali. Like everybody else, Quran, hadith mutawatir. We'll just call it sunnah mutawatir, but we mean hadith mutawatir. Then sunnah ahad. Then what? Ijma. Then qiyas. Later Hanbali, Ibn Taymiyyah followed Hanafi by bringing Istihsan before Sunnah Ahad. Okay? Bringing Istihsan before Sunnah Ahad. So, the purpose of this is not to... Purpose of this is really just to understand, yes, we are presenting these equations, but it doesn't mean you didn't have variations of the equation in the same school. Okay? The reason why I'm putting these equations up, therefore, is not to accurately represent a particular school that has evolved and has variety within, and we pretend as if there's no variety. Not all the Malikis put amal here. Some scholars within the Maliki, Ibn Abdul Barr, bring ahad hadith before amal. So this is just, what do you call, like the general, for the sake of just discussing the subject. The reason why I'm putting this up is so that we know what is a madhab. A madhab is a school that has an equation. And they believe this is the best equation for representing the Prophet. And this is the hierarchy. They all agree on Quran and Sunnah mutawatir. That is the common denominator. So if something is clear from the Quran and Sunnah that is mutawatir or hadith that are mutawatir, you will not have any difference of opinion among scholars. Why? No need for ijtihad, no need for other tools. It's been sorted out from the Quran and Sunnah already. So no need for ijtihad. So those teachings of Islam that come from these two sources, everybody is okay with them. We fast in Ramadan, who's arguing? Nobody. We go to Hajj in Makkah, who's arguing? Day for Arafat, who's arguing? These are coming from mutawatir or clear text of the Quran. Subuh is 2 rakahs, it's not in the Quran, but who is arguing? So when you look at those teachings to do with Aqidah, what makes us Muslims, they all come from these two. Yeah. That's why Aqidah has to be established on Qat'i Thubut and Qat'i Dilala. In other words, we are certain about its authenticity, means it comes from Quran or Sunnah Mutawatir. The Hanafi, Maliki and Shafi, some within the Hanbali said you could take Aqidah from Ahad Hadith if it was supported by something else, but not just on its own. Yeah. That was something that started later within Khawarij and others were, anyway, separate issue. But when you say somebody is a Muslim, it is because they have this denominator. And this section needs no ijtihad. These are not, you don't, it's too clear. There's no, if there's any ijtihad, it's because the Quranic verse is not clear. And it could mean this, it could mean that. So we'll come to that later. But as a source of information, what we all agree with, we do not argue, is information that comes from Quran and Sunnah Mutawatir. A scholar may say, I'm not comfortable going with Amal of Ahl al-Madinah. No problem. I'm not comfortable with Ahad Hadith. No problem. I consider something else greater than Ahad Hadith. I have a problem with your Qiyas. I have a problem with... Here, scholars differ, and they will continue to differ. So number one, this is the common denominator. Number two, if an issue comes from Quran and Sunnah Mutawatir, you will not know which madhab a person belongs to. Okay? I actually pray 4 rakahs for Isha. What madhab do I belong to? What?
In fact, this is what I was going to ask you, because I see that you draw a line when it comes to the Zahiri, Jafari and Zaidi and all this, Yabani and all that,
Even there.
I'm interested to find out what is their Sunnah, what do they say about Sunnah? Do they speak like the left-hand side or what?
To make life easier for myself, you can read more about the Zahiri and others in the material. Time would restrict one from going. However, why were they traditionally, and have they still remained as Muslims? They go to Kaaba, they go for Hajj, etc. Because while we may we may disagree with some of them on this, the Shia, for example, ijma is ijma of Ahl al-Bayt, not ijma of just anybody. So they've got their own definition of ijma. The Zahiri, Ibn Hazm's and Abu Dawud, the Zahiri school, considered so long as it was Sahih, it was on the same level as Mutawatir, okay, in authenticity. So it was a valid source and it came before anything else. But they will still consider Quran, Sunnah, Mutawatir as number one and number two. Ibn Hazm was a hadith scholar. So what you will find is this is a common denominator among all the schools. Where they differ and where you say, what madhab do you belong? This is where madhab kick in. Madhab kicks in, a methodology of ijtihad kicks in when the Quran and Sunnah have not solved the issue categorically. Okay? And we have to start reasoning, and we depend on various tools held by hundreds and thousands of scholars for each.
Praying 1 rakat witr, this is established in the Hanfi Muslim.
No, they all agree on witr, but they disagree on where to rank it. So Hanafi consider witr to be wajib, not fard. But that's because they have the in-between. So they consider it to be wajib because the Prophet did it again, like it was part of the Sunnah Mu'akkada of all the Nawafil. If you say which is the one the Prophet would nearly never miss, it was this one. So they considered it more important than just mustahab, whereas others said it all belongs to mustahab. They considered if you say it's wajib, then it is under the fard category. Since you've raised this, I think it's a good time to wrap up on this. What is a madhab? A school with an equation. So while some have this as their madhab, others differ in what comes before the other. And because of that, what it is equal to will sometimes differ. But when you find that, again, I can't keep tired of repeating this, this is the classical, but it has evolved. And there's diversity within. So it's not as simplistic as this is their equation. We will have to probably write about 5 different equations to satisfy the Shafi. Hanbali, even more equations. Hanbali, you can have 9 different opinions on one issue. When you hear, take for example, a woman embraces Islam, the husband remained a non-Muslim. Okay, what happens to that marriage? Ibn Qayyim says there are 9 different opinions on what happens to that marriage. 9. There are those opinions that say it is divorce. They only differ in the length of the iddah. Okay, so the Zahiri say it's instant, it's broken. Hanafi asks the husband, are you converting? No, cool, it's broken. Shafi, Maliki, and the list goes on. Okay, iddah starts, and then if it's not reconciled before, then etc., etc. Ibn Taymiyyah's preferred view is no, they are married, but no sexual relations, but they are married. Others take it, the woman decides whether she wants to stay married or not. Others, the judge will decide. Others, there's nothing wrong. Istihsan, the presumption of continuity. If we don't have anything to break the marriage, it stands. And the verse of the Quran which says the mu'min doesn't marry the mushrika or the other way around, they say that is prohibiting initiating marriage. Not a prohibition, it's not talking about existing marriage. It's saying don't go and initiate marriage with. It's not talking about this. Why? Because Ibn Taymiyyah and co looked at the time of Sahaba, and many women embraced Islam before their husbands. And later the husband embraced Islam, but there was no new nikah, means the marriage was recognized, etc., etc. It's not the topic. But the point being, you can actually have scholars having many diverse views, more views than the schools. Yeah, you'd think that maximum we should have only 4 opinions. Yeah, but you have 9 opinions, and you'd find 3 of them are all within here. 2 are here, one here, etc., etc. So depending on the issue.
Is it the separation? Is it not effected because the other party is mushrik? Not necessarily, from the Christians and all that, because this is what...
Zainab, the daughter of the Prophet, her husband was mushrik.
Yeah.
He embraced Islam, according to some 2 years after she had embraced Islam, according to others 6 years after he had embraced Islam, she had embraced Islam. So even though he was mushrik, and most of the Sahaba were mushrikun background, their families in Makkah were mushrikun.
I'm asking the question because the ayah is referring to the mushrikun.
Oh, I get your point. Now, that's if you take it, many don't take it that way. Most of them take it that if it's allowed for mushrikun, then you take it, it will be allowed for Ahl al-Kitab. Others take mushrikun and Ahl al-Kitab as same, as just people who have done shirk. Others, however, distinguish. So where Allah will say, لَمْ يَكُنِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ وَالْمُشْرِكُونَ, they're not the same. So hukum of do not pray for the mushrikun, they will say that's for mushrikun, not for Ahl al-Kitab. Ahl al-Kitab you can pray. Others say no. So this is going into the dilala of the difference of opinion regarding what they define as mushrikun. That is a tafsir issue, is a distraction. But no, it's good. This is the kind of footnote where some topics are not actually as simple as, sometimes the mufassirun differ, even without usul. They differ on the meaning of the word. Do they take this meaning? Do they give it a technical meaning? And we'll come to that when we come to bid'ah also, and what it means and how it is used. So, 1, equations. It's not arbitrary. It's not I just jump on Quran and Sunnah and that's all. Number 2, when you hear there's difference of opinion, it's usually, it has started because it's not clear in the Quran or Sunnah mutawatir. Yeah. And very importantly, when it is not clear in the Quran and Sunnah mutawatir, calm down. Chill. With the youth. Yeah, just calm down. Because somebody is going to differ. Yeah. Either because they put Istihsan next, or because they put ijma or amal or something next. Our unity and brotherhood comes directly from the Quran. You don't use something we disagree with to break a unity we agree on. You know, you don't, there's this maxim, al-yaqin la yazulu bi-shak. Certainty is not overruled by doubt. You don't use something that comes from dhanni, speculation, scholars have differed, and you're going to use a difference of opinion to break a unity when we all agree on that. You know, these are the fundamental sources of what you say makes a person a Muslim. You can differ on others and all of that, but really careful about the disunity thing.
I want to ask, is it necessary to follow particular madhab? For example, there's two ways. For example, I find, for example, niyyah. Maybe regarding this, for example, in Shafi, he make decision that niyyah is necessary for particular action. And maybe another imam, he say it's not necessary. So can he follow another madhab in a situation like this? And also sometimes it can happen, for example, I follow particular madhab, but now later I can find a clear hadith which is talking against the madhab which I follow.
Two sides about niyyah, intention. All of them agree that actions are judged by their intentions. They all agree on that one. What they differ on is, do I vocalize it or do I not need to vocalize it? You know, when I kill a mosquito, did I intend to kill a mosquito? Did I have two intentions in mind? That's one clear intention. I was going to kill a mosquito. Did I have to vocalize it? So for some scholars, it's good to vocalize because it helps your concentration. Others, no need. Why? Actions are judged by your intention and you had an intention. So the difference, they all agree you should have an intention. The difference is to vocalize or not to vocalize. On the issue to do with what if a hadith contradicts your madhab? You know, some say Imam Shafi says, any hadith that contradicts my madhab is not from me, or throw away my own and follow the hadith. That was not Shafi's method. If ijma conflicted with ahad hadith, Shafi would not go with ahad hadith. No scholar took a hadith without asking further questions. Did it contradict stronger evidence? Okay. And this is why the equations are important. These are not saying they reject hadith. They're just saying if at the time of Shafi, all scholars, who are these scholars? Muhaddithun, Mufassirun, Fuqaha, all scholars conclude on one thing. How can you bring one hadith and say I'm going to follow it over an ijma? You know, like, what is it you know about the hadith that everybody else didn't know? Is it understood? So even for Shafi, they didn't put an ahad hadith as superior to ijma. They're not saying you throw it away, but you weigh it with others before deciding. And it's not because they don't like the sunnah. No, it's actually because they love the sunnah that they are putting what is stronger than the other. Yeah. So number one, everybody accepts sunnah ahad. They just say yes, but there are other things stronger than sunnah ahad. And depends on the school. Now, because they respected their differences, because they respected each other's equations, they would respect the answer of that equation. Yeah. So when you apply this to a particular issue, and you come up saying the meat of cat is haram, it is because you took sunnah ahad above amal. There is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, you are forbidden from eating any bird that has talons or an animal that has canine teeth, carnivorous animals. But Malik sees Sahaba and some of the Tabi'een who ate a wolf, another one, or hyena, another group ate a jackal, it's like a desert fox. And so for him, they can't be ignorant of all of this. Therefore, he would say it is makruh to eat carnivorous animals, not haram. Okay. On dog saliva, is it najas or not? Malik say it is not najas. Why? Istihsan, the presumption of continuity. Everything is pure unless you have evidence to make it najas. The Shafis and the Hanbalis and others say, yeah, but it is najas. Because there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says when a bowl is licked, when a dog licks a bowl with water or something, wash it 7 times and one of those times with sand. Malik says, no problem. You wash your feet 3 times in wudu, but that doesn't mean there's najas on your feet. Okay. Why do you wash the bowl 7 times? Because it's najas. Did the Prophet say najas? But it has to be najas. Did the Prophet say najas? No. Okay, so it's your reasoning. It's you doing qiyas and saying, I'm about to get into the mosque and I rub my dog and it licks my hand and I still go in. You're the one saying that the licking of the bowl, which I should wash 7 times, applies to the licking of my hand and I wash it 7 times. This is qiyas. It's not according to the hadith, I should wash my hand 7 times. And then Malik says, the Quran allows you to use your hunting dog to go and catch a rabbit or some game. And there was nothing in the Quran or the Sunnah about washing the animal 7 times as if this was some super form of najasa. So they would challenge the qiyas and say the qiyas is not strong enough. We go back to istishab, the presumption of continuity. Everything is pure unless you have bring stronger evidence. For that, they say leave the dog alone. The point being, the moment you move into this territory, please calm down. Scholars greater than you will differ. I'm not saying it's not worth arguing, but whatever you conclude, just don't break our unity. Yeah, speak respectfully. And so scholars actually collated books on khilaf, on diverse opinions, just for people to calm down. You know, can a woman lead men in prayer? Ooh. You know, Imam at-Tabari says yes. Imam Abu Thawr says yes. These are mujtahid imams. You don't know what they're talking about. You can disagree with them, etc. But you'll really find, the moment you start getting those differences, it is not clear from the Quran or Sunnah mutawatir. The difference of opinion is coming from elsewhere. Yeah. Either Sunnah ahad, that this one doesn't consider as sufficient, or said, did the Prophet prohibit it? We'll come back to this topic on the methodological issue when we come to bid'ah.
Was it ever mentioned to raise that?
For example. Sorry.
So, when it comes to unity of the Quran, in this day and age when they talk of adultery and stoning to death, and the Quran says 80 lashes, but there's a hadith that Nazar Umar says the practice of this, and he even goes on to say that I'm afraid that later generations will say that this was not in the Quran, when it was in the Quran. So there's obviously a difference here when it comes to the jurisprudence and what is in the Quran. How do you reconcile it?
That is why you will find even scholars like Qaradawi, the difference of opinion, without going too specific, they agree certain injunctions come from the Quran and certain injunctions come from the Sunnah. But is it enough to make it a had or is it a ta'zir for the unmarried? Okay, sorry, for the married. For the married they differ. For the unmarried, that one is from the Quran. And it's similar to where something comes from the hadith, like apostasy, a person who leaves Islam, okay, should he be killed? And a hadith states that whoever leaves a religion should be killed. Like hadith seems to be very clear about it. It's when you find cases at the time of the Prophet where people did leave Islam and the Prophet forgave. Okay, there's a Christian who left, he was forgiven in Medina. A person after the conquest of Mecca also forgiven, another mushrik in Medina forgiven. Imam al-Shawkani actually says there is not one authentic hadith of the Prophet killing an apostate. There is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ narrated, is quoted, have said, the life of a person is sacred except in 4 circumstances. And there it mentions in the case of murder, the zina of the married. So that one is mentioned there. What's the other one? In the case of murder, in the case of zina of married, okay, 3. And in the case of murtad, the person who apostatized, mufariq lil jama'ah, who differed or broke away from the community. In a hadith narrated by Aisha, in her version of the hadith, it says the life of a Muslim is sacred except where the person is guilty of murder or zina of the married, or the apostate who leaves his religion, or muharib, and he fights against. So Ibn Taymiyyah took that hadith, that is the hadith man badala dinu faqtuluhu as mafhum bighayrihi. It is understood by looking at other hadith. In other words, the other hadith are explaining that the case of the muharib is one of treason, where you went and you fought back. You are being killed because you fought back. So Al-Baji and some of these scholars take the case of a murtad as ta'zir. Ta'zir means it is left to the discretion of the judge. The judge will decide, not had. In other words, yes, you've got all the hadith, but scholars differ on whether a particular punishment is a had category or whether it's a ta'zir category. And this is not new. Some consider the punishment for alcohol as a had. Others consider no, it's ta'zir. The ones they all agree, no difference of opinion, are hudud, are the case of hiraba, it's clearly in the Quran, the case of qazaf, slander, inchastity, what again? Stealing, and then the 100 lashes. Those are clear in the Quran, so you don't have differences there in how it is categorized. The others, they differ in how they are categorized. But you will find, even within the, we'll come back to that. We have to move. So, equations, calm down. The job of madhabs is to handle uncertainty or ambiguity if it is not clarified in the Quran and the Sunnah. Yeah, so differences begin, but we respect that also. Just to help us appreciate the Hanafi classification. The Hanafi are trying to be very sensitive to the authority behind a categorization of something in this ahkam at-taklifiyah, this issue of is it haram, is it halal, is it mustahab, whatever. Generally, if it belongs to makruh, generally, all this category, this is halal, it's allowed to do this, no sin. No sin, no sin, no sin. Sin starts with haram. Because of that, this is generally called haram, and this is all called halal. Okay? Hanafis feel this is a bit too simplistic. And they come up with an additional criteria. They feel fard is something that is obligatory. There's a sin if you don't do it, like your 5 daily prayers. But the evidence for fard must come from Quran or Sunnah mutawatir, not from any other source. If you are wanting to say something is a sin, if you omit it, you must do it. But your evidence is coming from qiyas, or it's coming from sunnah ahad, or it's coming from anything that has some level of dhanni. This is all dhanni evidence. There's a level of speculation. You may be right, you may be wrong. The moment there's one drop of dhanni, Hanafis will say, call it wajib, don't call it fard. And the moment it is from Quran and Sunnah, no mutawatir, no doubt about the certainty or the meaning. The moment the meaning, well, they bring it down. If in the meaning, this is haram, yeah, but could be. The moment they have that, they don't call it haram. They don't want to say makruh, go ahead. So they have another category of makruh tahrimi, which is under the haram category. There is a sin for committing this, but it's the level of certainty of the sin that is not as serious as this. This to them, this is clear, Quran and Sunnah, mutawatir, nobody argues. So the nuance in the Hanafi is really to separate this based on the certainty of the evidence. Yeah, where there's no doubt about it, they have no problem calling it this. Malikis, from their equation, for example, an ahad hadith, this is general Maliki, ahad hadith, no supporting evidence from anywhere else, cannot make something fard or wajib, which to them is the same. Yeah, it can only stop at mustahab. Whereas Hanafi can make something wajib and Shafi can make something wajib from, which is the same thing as fard, with an ahad hadith. In other words, even when you bring a piece of evidence, how strong is this evidence? Depending on what weight they give it. The Malikis take it, if an ahad hadith was part of the sunnah, it was done, Sahaba knew about it, we will find it in amal. Okay? And if amal has a hadith backing it, that's knuckle, it's sorted out, don't argue about it. So again, this is just trying to make it more confusing for us to understand. We're not here to discuss everything. I'm not even qualified to discuss everything, but just for us to understand, when a scholar says something is mustahab, don't think you can guess his evidence unless you know his equation. Yeah. But the moment you hear one scholar says this, one scholar says something else, and these, particularly if there's a school behind it, or he's a mujtahid imam, then you are nearly 100% sure it's because it has not been sorted out by Quran and Sunnah mutawatir. It's an area where there's the need. That is why they're arguing. That is why the difference exists. Yes, sir.
Can is there danger of changing the equation to rationalize a bid'ah?
Yes. Is there a danger of changing equations just to rationalize things? Yes, there is that danger, which is why the school of thought was actually categorized by its equation. That's why it was a consistent, that's how they always approach it. And if there's a difference within the school, they know the difference. But you can't come and, I am Maliki, and you just come with your own methodology. Like, they can instantly see what's wrong with yours. Which is why it is useful to actually study the methodologies of the schools. It's useful to know this, because when somebody then gives you a fatwa, birthday parties are haram. Okay? Istihsan, everything halal except what is haram. Yeah. Birthday parties, urf, yes. They're the urf of a particular people. Yeah. So it should actually start with validation. If you're going to say it's haram, no problem. Everything is halal except what is haram. So let's start looking for the haram from the Quran or Sunnah. Where do we, and then we see where you're coming from. But not no equation is haram. Yeah. You don't haram, I feel like making it haram. I don't like it. No, not you. We go to the usul, we go to the roots. Yeah. So you have to have a methodical approach for everything if you are to reduce this issue of going with taste. Yak. Or yak is not a basis for haram. That's just you. No. The these tools, let's look at them here. These ones like Saddu Zaria, Maslaha, and Istihsan, they are mainly Maqasid protecting. They are mainly protecting values of justice, of fairness. They are protecting the spirit of the law. In other words, you see the spirit being protected even there. So each madhab has its way of protecting the spirit too. So while later we will see how these all fall under Maqasid, that just in classical usul, they have these as safety nets. You know what safety nets do in circuses? What do they do?
Prevent people from dying before you.
Prevent people from dying. Yeah, breaking your neck. That when scholars get involved in the intellectual gymnastics of ijtihad, these tools are there to make sure you don't go against those clear objectives. You don't allow your ijtihad and human reasoning, as much as you would want to say it's close to the Quran and close to the Sunnah, from going clearly against justice, compassion, wisdom, and benefit or maslahah. So Ibn Qayyim said, he said, the Sharia is all about bringing benefit in this life and the hereafter for humanity. He said in its entirety, and he mentioned 4 things. He said in its entirety, it's about justice, mercy, wisdom, and benefit. Any ruling that goes from justice to injustice, from mercy to its opposite, from wisdom to folly, from benefit to mafsada or harm, is a ruling that does not belong to the Sharia, even if somebody claims it's according to some interpretation.
Our safety nets are broken.
So,
Can you repeat it?
Yes, please repeat.
it's on your page, it's written, it's in your material. He says, the Sharia is meant to bring benefit to human beings or humanity in this life and in the hereafter. In its entirety, it's about achieving justice, rahmah or wisdom, mercy, wisdom, and benefit. Any ruling that moves from justice to injustice, mercy to its opposite, I'm quoting him, otherwise it would be mercy to kindness, etc. Mercy to its opposite, wisdom to folly, and benefit to harm. Mafsada could also mean evil. He said any ruling that moves from any of those maqasid to the mafasid is a ruling that does not belong to the Sharia, even if somebody claims it's according to their interpretation. Basically what they're saying, what these scholars are saying, Ibn Taymiyyah says something, they all say it in different ways, is you can't have things like justice, you have from the Quran and all of these sources, you have justice established by so many verses of the Quran. Like how many verses talk about justice and being against dhulm and being against, like there are too many. How much do we have from the Quran and Sunnah about mercy and compassion and rahmah and the Prophet being a Nabiur Rahmah, and the list goes on, and forgiveness and have pity on the weak and. How much do we have about shura and getting wisdom, and using your head? Just use your head, be sensible. How much do we have about being useful and bringing benefit? Okay, heaps of it. I mean, when you look at what are we looking for in qiyas, we're looking for the wisdom behind prohibitions. Okay, when you look at being useful, the whole thing on searching for ilman nafi'an and the best among you are those who are most useful. Khairun nas man yanfa'un nas, and the whole, all of that. These values come from so many verses of the Quran and hadith. Nobody argues is Islam actually interested in this? So when you come up with your own use of an equation or your own ijtihad, it's your ijtihad. How can we accept your ijtihad when it conflicts with this, when we know we are sure where that came from, we're not sure where yours came from? Yours is the one we should be questioning. Okay? And as we will see later on, inshallah, part of the job of qawaid and maqasid is to learn when to put the brakes on when any of these is being undermined. Okay? So for example, we'll come back to maxims, but this is partly what Istihsan is about. Okay? This concern for maslahah. And in the Shafi school, they brought maslahah earlier on. The Hanbali school, they brought Istihsan earlier on. But Istihsan is really just concern for equity, compassion, mercy. When any of these tools are going to end up going against that, they triangulate and say, no way, we can't allow this, then Istihsan steps in and produces a fatwa that is or should be in line with the values. Yes.
I had a question previously, I think we went forward. We all want to be united on the Quran, and that's what we agree on. Right? But how come? And Aqidah is also based on Quran, and we say we must keep the unity on Quran. But we have fundamental differences, like whether Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha is from the Ahl Bayt or not. It's established that she is a Sahabiya, and Fadlan and Dalik, she is one of the mothers of the Ummah. Now, there's a difference on Quran. You see, so it's easy for us to say we must unite on Quran, but then is there something else that made that happen, that they differed with us on a Quran ayat? That's one. Two, what we see nowadays is that people want to not break the nets, but they want to undo the safety nets. When a masala is posed to the ummah based on istihsan and maslaha, and primarily, I think most of the time, on sadr zariya, right? That is discarded. You say, but you know what, these are stoppages, why are you bringing this thing? But the question is that if we open that door, to what extent are we going to go? That is why these safety nets were there.
Good. So one of the things we will do, inshallah, we'll come to both of these. The next thing we'll be looking at is this issue of maximizing certainty in the area of zanni and thubut. So that will, inshallah, handle this issue of, because something comes from the Quran or Sunnah mutawatir, doesn't automatically make it an aqidah issue. It could be a muamala issue. It could be a sirah issue. You know, was the Prophet's father Abdullah? Yes. I believe Abdullah was, or I don't believe Abdullah was, it's not an aqidah issue. Okay? It's not was it true or not true. It's like saying we have more than enough evidence that the earth is spherical. Okay? If you don't believe that, should we still say you're a Muslim? It's not an aqidah issue. Okay? So, just because something is in the Quran doesn't make it an aqidah issue. The Quran may say something and everybody agrees on what is said, but they differ on what is meant. This is because the Quran, which is qati thubut, nobody argues about its authenticity, but some verses are dhanni dilala. The meaning and the implication is open to difference of opinion. And we'll come, this is actually what we'll now move into. Exactly, I thought so. So we'll go for a break, inshallah, and when we come back, we'll try and do the marathon for the rest. Jazakumullah khair.